When heavy rains or storms hit Louisiana, it doesn't take much for some areas to flood, but some people just don't understand why their neighborhoods flooded a lot more than ever in the past in past recent heavy rains or storms. So with us today to explain some of those reasons is Dillard University professor Robert Collins of the Urban Studies and Public Policy Department. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, it's all very timely given we are in hurricane season, so I appreciate you coming in. What are some of the reasons an area would flood now? And someone would say, this has never happened in decades. I don't understand where all this water is coming from.
Well, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that urban development itself can cause flooding, because as you add more urban development, you add more concrete, you add more roads, you add more sidewalks, you add impervious surfaces, and so the water can't naturally drain into the water table, and so you get runoff. And when you get runoff, the water actually runs off these impervious surfaces into the neighborhood. So it's a fact that if, just because an area didn't flood 30 years ago when there were no houses there, now when you have impervious surfaces, it's going to flood now because there's nowhere for the water to go.
So when someone is saying, hey, don't worry about flood insurance in this area, or my grandpa, whatever, told me it never floods around here, what should you look around yourself, or what can you research yourself to find out?
Well, you can go online, you can look at the FEMA flood maps, of course, but those are not always accurate. Those are constantly being updated.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one issue. You can also look at the elevation of your neighborhood at the flood elevation. There are so many tools available now on the internet that were not available 10 or 15 years ago, for example, when we had Katrina. So there's a lot of information that a smart homeowner can go online and get, but it's important to keep in mind, just because your neighborhood is above sea level doesn't mean it won't flood. Many of the areas that flooded during the last rain event were 20, 30, 40 feet above sea level, and they still flooded.
Baton Rouge.
Exactly.
People were shocked with that. I mean, how could that be? I mean, I understand you got to factor in the rain is sitting over you for a long period of time, because you say that obviously makes a difference.
Yes.
But in areas that have never flooded, you have to look at what the buildup is, right?
Sure. Well, when you have a 30-inch rain event, the reality is no drainage system in the world is going to be able to deal with 30 inches of rain. So really the only thing, and there's simply nowhere for the water to go. It doesn't matter what your elevation above sea level is. So in a situation like that, the only thing that would have helped the people in the Prairieville area, in the greater Baton Rouge area, is inundation canals that would have removed the water from the Amite River basin and drained it to the Mississippi River. There have been federal infrastructure projects on the books that have planned to do that in the past, but because of funding being cut off by Congress, those infrastructure projects were never completed, and as a result, the area was just overwhelmed with water.
Okay, and I know you agree, if you live anywhere in Louisiana, you should have flood insurance.
You should
live
have
near
flood
rivers
insurance.
or whatever, you should have flood insurance, because
Yes.
that's going to factor
Yes.
in. Talk about moving forward. What's happening right now? What are they rechecking that may make building differently to get permits?
Okay, so the U.S. Geological Survey has about 30 teams out in the field right now. We've actually seen them. Dillard University actually has its own team in the field right now. We have a Dillard Environmental Research team that's in the field right now, and we've seen the USGS folks, and so they're checking flood levels, and based on their new research, they're going to recalibrate the FEMA flood maps. But again, I would caution people, just because you go to purchase a home, you have a FEMA flood map, you're not in the flood zone. I would caution people that does not mean that you can't flood. It's based on past results. All FEMA flood maps they can't really predict what's going to happen into the future. It's based on what has happened in the past. So I would caution people in a 30-inch rain event, until the Corps of Engineers builds those inundation canals that I talked about that could drain the water out, I would caution you need flood insurance.
Okay, some really good advice, Dan. I look forward to seeing what these new geological teams come up with based on the historic rains we just saw.
Sure.
Appreciate you coming in
Thank
always.
you. And if anybody wants to keep up with the flood recovery, they can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Robert Collins.
Will be doing. Thank you.